The question of where do I look for an accountant is a question that I'm often asked. And so today I'm joined by Nicole, who's a small business owner, and we are going to talk about some of the things you'll want to ask when interviewing an accountant and how to go about that process. Nicole, welcome.
Thank you. So really, if you could just start from the top, what are the steps I would take if this is something I'm considering? Where do I even start my search for an accountant?
Well, the first place to start would be word of mouth. Do you have colleagues you work with who can make a recommendation? That would be a place to start. There's also professional directories as well, but I think I would go with word of mouth. And is there a recommendation? And start from there. I'd also say don't just interview one. I'd look for three or four and just try to get people's impressions. Ask them, why do you like your accountant? What is there about your accountant that makes you confident and gives you a good experience? So those would be some of the basic places to start with.
So in terms of if I was looking for a firm or if I've decided I want to move forward, what kind of systems, what kind of, software, whatever might they have in place that I should know about, that I should be looking for, that I should maybe ask questions about?
Well, the first thing I do when I'm interviewing a prospective client, because it is an interview both ways, is tell me how you keep track of your expenses. What systems do you have in place? Some people are very organized, other people are not organized. And so what we try to do is when I'm having a conversation with a prospective client is get a feel for where they are, what they're doing, and then see if there's a fit in terms of what systems. If somebody is not strong or is looking for some guidance, I like to think that from a half-hour conversation or an hour-long conversation, they will go away with a system. If they're not sure how to do something, that's what I'm there for. And so if you come to me and say, you know what, I'm looking for an accountant, I'll first say to you, Nicole, so what are you doing to keep track of your expenses? What I'm concerned about for any client is I don't want to miss expenses. You work hard to earn your income. And so I want to make sure that we maximize all the deductions possible. So oftentimes people will say, well, I have a business credit card and I have a personal credit card and things like that. And so an accountant will oftentimes will just simply say, okay, well, put all your business expenses on that one credit card and give me that at the end of the year. And that's what I'm looking for, and very little direction. What I hope you're going to come away with from a conversation, and I think this is what anyone watching this video today is going to want to come away with, is a sense of, all right, do I now have a system for keeping track of my expenses? And do I have a system for keeping track of my kilometers because I'm using my car for work if I have a car for work? And so in some sense, you're looking for ideas as much as you are in terms of systems, as much as you are for an accountant.
Right.
So those will be the explanation. If somebody says to you, just give me your receipts and we'll put them all together, I would be a little bit concerned about that. I'm trying to give you, as many accountants would, a way of capturing and giving you a system to follow that makes sense. Doesn't take a lot of time. Sometimes I've had clients who said, I took 3 days off of work just to get all my stuff together. What I say to clients is, I need you to spend 20 or 30 minutes a month keeping track of your expenses. Here's how you should do it.
Right.
It's simple and straightforward. And if you're not sure whether a purchase is an expense or not, then highlight it on your spreadsheet. We give you a spreadsheet as an example and tell you, here's how to keep track of things. So
I've learned that one the hard way.
Yes.
The do it along the way versus all at the end of the year.
And then you have to go back over 12 months.
Yes.
And try to reconstruct history. And
Terrible.
remember what that Amazon purchase was, or right? Yeah.
Yes.
Not easy.
Exactly. So tell me, as I'm talking through and getting to know these prospective accountants, should they be taking an interest in my business and sort of what the business is, how I run things, all of that?
Absolutely. You want to see if there's a good chemistry there to start with. And does the person seem to have an interest in your business? I know when I start to talk to people who I might be working with in the future, what they do is the first thing I'm interested in. How do you earn your income? How long have you been in business? How did you get into this business? All of those types of questions that give me a little bit of context to your situation and let me give me an insight into whether or not I have the capability and the capacity to take on your work, as well as does it interest me?
Right.
So, yeah.
And what kind of questions do you think I should expect from those prospective accountants?
Yeah, the types of questions I would ask is how do you keep track of your expenses? What's your system for keeping track of expenses? Where do you earn your income from? What are your sources of income? How long have you been in this business? The other questions that also come to mind is how well do you work with technology?
Right.
Right. Sometimes I've found in the past, our firm, as an example, is paperless. And so if somebody is still not paperless, that isn't necessarily a good fit.
Right.
Right. And so we want to see that there's a good fit. And then you'll want to be comfortable that we're not just going to email your confidential information, that we've got good systems in place. So I would ask the firm, what systems do you have to protect my private information? How am I going to get you information? How do I send it to you? Do I courier it to you? Do I send it to you? Do I upload it to a secure portal? Those are the types of questions I think would come to mind for anyone looking to hire an accountant.
Perfect. So would you say that throughout this process that potentially I could also learn things from these accountants along the way? And what types of things do you think I could glean out of the whole process?
Yeah, I always end every prospective interview with a client by asking them, "Did you learn something today?" Because I think it's important that not only do I work on your file, but that I also educate you along the way. If I can do that, if I can raise examples of things for people, it takes what is my world and makes a little bit of your world. And so if I can ask questions and find out some information, I'll give you an example. Recently, I was talking to a client. They were a physician, and so I'm always saying to people, "Do you know what?" Asking the question, "Do you know what an expense is?" And it seems like an obvious question, but it's surprising. People think very narrowly around an expense, and so I'm always trying to provide examples of things that will expand your understanding of what an expense is. And so this person said, we were talking about how they'd spent their summer, and they said, "Oh, we rented a cottage north of here, and my partner and our kids had a great time while I was on call." And so I said to this person, "You were on call? What do you mean you were on call?" And they said, "Well, I was on call at a local hospital." And I said, "So do you think that's an expense?" And they said, "I don't know. I hadn't really thought of that." And I said, "Well, is there a connection between earning the income you earned that week and paying for that cottage? Because if there is, that meets the definition of an expense." And so I always try to give those examples. And hopefully the person that you're interviewing as a prospective accountant is going to broaden your thinking, broaden your understanding, not just give you a list, here's the expenses you can claim, but start thinking about how you're presently spending your money. And is there anything in there that I hadn't thought of before that could actually represent an expense? So that would be a way that even if we never worked together, they would go, "You know what? I learned 2 or 3 things out of that conversation."
Seems like a good tip. And also, I think would give me, a pretty good indication of what this person might be like to work with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because certainly I know I like to not just have someone take over, but I want to come out of this knowing a bit more about it, feeling a bit more confident about the whole process, just so that I can also better organize myself and think about this as well. And in terms of just kind of their role, the expectations, how this will work on an ongoing basis, what can I expect to hear from them in that area?
Well, to be specific, I would ask the firm, who am I going to work with? on a day-to-day or as I interact with you, who is going to be my point of contact? Because, oftentimes in the detail end of things, it won't necessarily be me,
Right.
right? It'll be a staff person, and I'll introduce them and make that connection. So that would be a question I ask. Who am I going to work with on a day-to-day basis? And then what's your expectation of me as a client? What do you want from me? When do you want it? And another question that you should feel free to ask is, or express what your expectation of me is.
Right.
So I always say to people, because oftentimes small business owners haven't had a lot of experience dealing with accountants. So I will say my expectation is you'll follow the systems I give you. Here's how I would like it done. Sometimes we have to reorientate people who are becoming clients because either what they're doing in terms of the spreadsheet, and I don't know, Nicole, if you keep a spreadsheet or not, but I might look at it and go, wow, I think that's probably taking you a long time to prepare.
Right.
You don't necessarily need to spend all that time. I say to people, depending on the type of business and how large that business is, your bookkeeping for the small business owner and let me define what I would imagine that to be. Somebody who does IT consulting work or sole proprietors, maybe one or two staff, but that would be the type of business that I'm thinking of. Then I would say, okay, here's the system I'd like you to follow. If you do this, then I can be comfortable that we're not going to miss expenses. It's not going to, or we'll minimize the risk of missing expenses. It won't take a lot of time each month. I need you to do this each month because oftentimes when people fall behind, it takes forever and memories are short. So you need to spend, 30 to 40 minutes a month and send this through to us. We ask that you submit it on a monthly basis. As much of an exercise to keep the client on track as necessary, but it doesn't necessarily have to be the case, but that's a suggestion. And so I say, here's how I envision us working together. This is what I need from you. And then if you can follow that, this is what you can expect of me. You point out the items that have a connection between earning your income and the expense that you've purchased. I need you to list those for me following our system. My job is then to tell you, here's what we can claim and here's what we can't claim. So I say as an example, the concept behind an expense, and I mentioned it before, the concept behind an expense for a business owner is that there's a connection between earning their income and incurring that expense. And so I say to prospective clients, in terms of what an expense is, just because there's a connection between the expense and earning your income doesn't mean we can deduct it.
Right.
But I need you to keep track of those. I need you to point those things out to me. And then I, in turn, say, yes, we can claim that, or no, we can't claim it.
Right.
So as an example, I say to people, I don't know if you're a golfer or not, but if you take a prospective client out for a round of golf and you're hoping to get their business and you come back and say, here's an expense. I just spent $100 on green fees to court this prospective customer. Clearly, there is a connection between the prospect of earning income and that expense. My job, though, is to say, Nicole, I'm sorry, but the Income Tax Act tells you we can't claim green fees, right? Or you take a client out for lunch or out for dinner, and here's the receipt. You've done your job. You've drawn it to my attention. And by the way, don't give me the receipts. I just want a spreadsheet, right?
Yeah.
And my job is to say, here's what we can claim of that. Right. So it's the idea of explaining to you, all right, here's a system, please follow it. And then you can expect of me that I will maximize expenses for you if it's doing your tax return. But that will give you an idea of the type of communication and expectations as well. It's important to have that.
Yeah, absolutely. So would you say, as I'm going through this process, that it would be important for me to try and find an accountant that works with similar businesses to mine? How broad is that? What does that look like?
Yeah, it's a question that comes up. I mean, some businesses are very specific, so there's more to know. I'm speaking as an accountant, whereas oftentimes businesses are pretty generic. You might think of your business as being very specific, and I might look at it and go, well, that's like the lion's share of my clients.
Right.
What I would say as you interview prospective accountants is to say, okay, do you have other files like mine?
Right.
How many? Would you know this area well? Ask pointed questions. I always say, don't be afraid to ask tough questions. It's your only time when you're doing that. So, I'm always saying to people who are asking this question, how do I find an accountant? Ask tough questions. Are you qualified? Are you qualified to do my file? Have you had experience in this? How many clients like mine do you have? That will give you a feel of whether or not this person knows you. I would caution, if the part of the word of mouth is a good place to start for an accountant, but it's relying on the fact that your colleague or whoever's made that referral actually knows something about the competency of an accountant.
Right.
And that isn't always certain, right?
Right.
So part of this process now of interviewing 3 or 4 is just to try to suss out their understanding and their knowledge, and how aware are they in your area.
Right.
So,
and I would guess as well, just because a colleague or someone you know recommended them, you might work differently than that person, right?
Yeah,
so at least if you can source a few of those, then you can find the one that most closely aligns.
Yeah.
And in terms of when I have questions overall, I think you kind of touched on this a little bit, but maybe you could give a bit more detail on who I might be dealing with once I've chosen a firm to work with. What does that process look like?
Yeah. So I always say to people, here is this person you're going to work with on the day-to-day aspects of your file. Make sure you copy me on all emails,
right,
so that you know that the person who's ultimately responsible. I mean, ultimately, my name's on the work. I'm the one responsible. But I would ask that very question and just say, okay, so what should I ask of you, and what should I ask of your staff? And oftentimes you may not know the difference. So I would say, you know what, if it's tax related, if you've got a question, send it to me. And if I feel it's something that needs to be handed off, it's a simple, straightforward question, I'll do that. I like to know what a client's asking, just to stay in touch on those various issues. The other thing you should be thinking about as well is not just when it comes to, and this is part of the interview process, is identifying what you need of an accountant. Is it somebody who's just going to prepare your personal tax return? Okay, that's one thing.
Right.
But now you're thinking about buying or leasing a car, or you've got debt and you're thinking, should I pay down my debt, or should I put money in my RSP? Those types of questions are the types of questions I would expect a client to ask, because there's some expertise involved in that. And so I'm always saying to people, if you have a question, don't hesitate. That's what I'm here for. And then, of course, people will ask the question, so do you charge for phone calls and inquiries and things like that? Yes, typically that's how accountants earn their income, right? It's based on time. But I would say, in my experience, most accountants are looking at the long-term relationship. And so not every call gets billed. And it depends on how involved. If it's a quick question, then quick questions result in quick answers, oftentimes. But I always smile when somebody writes in an email to me and says, just a quick question, and it's like, no, that's not a quick question. You might think that's a quick question, but that's not a quick question.
I feel like that happens a lot across the board.
Yes.
And so then, would you say, in that sort of scenario, like, is that something that maybe, just like people have financial advisors and all of that, is that something that you could sit down once a year and sort of talk in more depth? Or, outside of just the business scenario, that larger sort of life picture, what would you recommend there?
That depends. It depends on the setup of the business. If it's a sole proprietor, then there's really a personal tax return each year, maybe a GST return that needs to get taken care of. And so there isn't as much work required in that. That's not to say that you don't have questions about, well, should I put money in my RSP or things like that? Right. And so I would ask the question and say, so how often will we interact?
Right.
And I'll say in reply to the person, well, what is it you're expecting of me? What do you need an accountant to do? Is it just prepare your personal tax return? Fine. But if it's prepare your personal tax return and be available for questions and some financial planning along the way, then yeah, absolutely. And it's important you scope out that engagement. What is it you're expecting? But if you're saying no, just do my personal tax return, and then expect that an accountant is going to give you their opinion on whether you should invest in Bitcoin or something like that, that's not the mandate.
Right.
So you need to be clear in terms of what your expectations are.
Right.
So.
And maybe you sort of have more than one person that you're working with. So sort of figuring out the line potentially between that accountant and a financial planner or something like that.
Yeah. I always take a team approach. I try to take a team approach. And so I will say to a prospective client, or once they retain me, who's your insurance advisor? Mm-hmm. Who's your investment advisor? And maybe loop me into a call with them. It doesn't have to be for a long time, but just to get a sense of what's going on in Nicole's file in terms of investments,
right?
And that type of thing, because there's some tax implications with investments.
Yeah.
And so I always think if you can have a team approach, it doesn't have to be somebody I'm recommending. If you're working with somebody, I'll work with them. I have no bias or preference in that respect. But I think if you can take a team approach, the client's better served.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
And if you don't have a contact for that, another question is, could you put me in touch with somebody who you could recommend as a financial advisor or in insurance or those areas, or a lawyer?
Right.
So.
Great. So I think a big concern for a lot of people, and you've mentioned it briefly already, is just privacy of information. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of important information that I think we don't always all feel comfortable sharing. So what sorts of questions, what sorts of reactions should I be getting when I ask about that?
Well, I would hope a firm is going to say, yeah, we take the privacy of your information carefully. That's why we use a secure portal as an example, just so that you can be certain that your information is protected. And that's pretty standard now. You'll see on a lot of firms' websites, you'll see if you go onto their homepage, there'll be a little client login button somewhere on the homepage. That's where they upload documents or they log into a portal so they can get their tax return or things like that. But that's pretty standard nowadays. I have seen some firms who will just email information. I'm glad to say it's not very frequent that happens, but they just send you a personal tax return or something by email, and you think, oh, all that information is now open, for all to see. But it's pretty standard. But I would certainly ask them about their protocols around protecting the privacy of your information. I think that's standard now.
Perfect. Yeah. Okay, so I think at this point, it'd be really great to hear from you. Just what are some key, tough questions that I can ask to really help me narrow down and make my decision?
Yeah. Fees would not be the first question.
Right.
Competence is by far what I'm encouraging people to go for. This is your financial health. So this is not about, it's not a loaf of bread you're buying.
Right.
So I would certainly be interested in terms of fees, but at a much lower level. What I would ask for is what's the plan you have for my file?
Right.
In advance of the meeting, hopefully you've given me a little bit of information about your work. Have they actually read your website? Found out some information about you so that going into the conversation, they have some questions to ask of you. That demonstrates interest.
Yep.
And also flags some questions that might come to mind, and potentially some conflicts if there's any conflicts as well. And then ask, what do you need of me? What expectations do you have, and how am I to put things together? That would be another question. Also remember that that in these interviews, you as a client are being interviewed as well. This is two ways, right? And so sometimes there just isn't a good fit. And I've said to clients sometimes, maybe you've still got a good relationship with an existing accountant. Maybe you should go back and talk to them. And if there's problems, say, oh, listen, you know what, your service level isn't up to my expectation. I don't want to leave, but if it continues this way, we can't continue to work together.
Right.
And then other questions that I would ask is, what do you do for professional development each year? How do you stay current? What was the last course you took? All CPAs have professional development requirements they have to meet each year. But again, practices can vary. So you're going to want, if it's for personal tax, you're going to want somebody who's staying up to speed on income tax matters, excise tax for GST as well.
Right.
So ask about that.
Yeah, I think that gives me a really good place to start, or anyone obviously undertaking this. And are there any key red flags that immediately, if this comes up in this interview process, you would be hesitant to potentially work with this person?
Well, I know what would be a red flag for me is if somebody said, you know, I do a little bit of cash on the side, that I don't report income. Okay, well, good for you. Thanks.
Right.
I wish you well. But that would be, for me, a red flag for a client. For me as an accountant, a high turnover of previous accountants makes me wonder, I wonder why that's the case. Right? Maybe they've just had misfortune in terms of their choices in the past, or maybe it indicates to me there could be a problem. Now, that's from my side of things. From your side, as you look to interview a client, or an accountant, are they interested? The things we've talked about, are they asking good questions? Do I feel comfortable talking to this person? And then, by all means, the question about fees is one that you should ask. Feel free to ask. And what can I expect to pay? Those would be the tougher questions. We've talked about staff as well, and then timelines on things. When do you need my information?
Right.
How much are they going to take the lead in terms of helping you in this area? Would also be something it's always challenging when you have to chase a client for information, right? They're late. Accountants need a certain amount of time to turn information around. And so when somebody's well organized, that goes a long way in terms of the relationship with the accountant.
Right.
As well. Other questions? Do you have others?
So I know when I've looked to hire, say, freelancers in what I do, the world of marketing, I'll also ask for references. Is that a thing in this scenario?
Yeah,
do
absolutely.
People ask accountants for others? Because I know I'd probably like to speak to maybe a couple of clients they have that have similar businesses to mine, so I can really glean what to expect and what the relationship is like.
Yeah, I mean, client confidentiality is an issue. So I would first, if somebody asked me that, I would first say, let me get you a couple of names. I'd approach clients, say, would you mind if I passed your name along, and they can tell you a little bit about the experience that they've had. Also, just what you find in terms of their website. Is there any recommendations on the website?
Right.
Have clients endorsed them? Those are people that are willing to be public about their relationship. So that's a fair question to ask. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. So very good.
I think that's it from my perspective. Is there any sort of last advice you'd give?
I think we've covered the major items here. Remember, what's the competency of the person? Have they got experience in files like mine? Where have I got this person's name from? Do I trust them? Do I feel the person takes an interest in my file? Do they seem too busy, or do they ask good questions? Do I learn things from my conversations with them? Do they map out a course? Do they say to me, here's my plan for your file, so that you as a client have a sense of what the next year is going to look like? When are they going to check in with you? Those would be the types of things I would expect from from an accountant if I'm looking to hire one.
Perfect.
All right.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Nicole. We hope you found this session of help. If you have any other questions, feel free to contact us. Or if you have questions of your own, we're here to provide you with our advice and experience. Thanks for your time.